How long does it take for one newly placed hair follicle to fully anchor within the skin so that it doesn't fall out after a hair transplant? Let's talk about graft anchoring. And what I mean by that is when we put in hair follicle grafts into your skin straight after a transplant, how long does it take for them to be kind of stuck in place so that simple movements and simple touching is not going to dislodge them? Because everyone knows there's about a 1 to 2 week recovery period after a transplant, but you may not understand exactly why we're a little bit strict about exactly what you can and cannot do after this. So let's go through how long does it actually take for that graft, for one follicular graft to become fully anchored inside the skin. So before we carry on, if you like information like this, where you like clear, concise, useful medical information regarding hair transplants and anything else medical, then make sure you do subscribe to this channel because we'll be coming out with a lot of these in the future and it can help you make more informed decisions. So first off, what is a graft, right? A graft is what we call the hair follicle, and that follicle has a few different structures in it. When we extract this hair follicle from the donor area, which is typically the back of the head, we're going to be removing not just the hair, we're going to be removing obviously the bulb, which is the bottom bit of the hair. You know, sometimes if you pull out hair, you might see the little fat part right at the end of the hair. That's called the bulb. We also remove the sebaceous gland next to it, which is a sort of sweat and oil producing gland next to it, a little bit of the erector pili muscle. So what is the erector pili muscle? It's a tiny little muscle attached to most hairs. And you know, if you've ever felt like someone's talking about you, or if you get scared suddenly, you feel like your hair stands up on end. That is caused by this tiny little muscle attached to each and every single hair follicle that causes it to stand up. And so we take that whole architecture, that whole structure, and we call that a graft. And that's what gets implanted into the top of your head or wherever else you need hair. When we implant it, first we've made an incision. An incision is made of a tiny little blade. In our case, we use a sapphire gemstone blade. So a tiny little blade, either it's 1.3 millimeters or 1.4 millimeters thick. That creates a small little incision and the graft is placed manually inside that area. There are other ways to implant grafts into incisions. You can use a Choi pen, which is DHI. Typically people use forceps, sometimes diamond dusted, and very skilled hands and very skilled technicians in order to implant them inside that incision. It has to go in the right way. There's an easy way of thinking about it. I don't know if you've ever played that game when you were young called Operation, where it's a sort of board game where you have to pick the little organs out of the guy on the board, and you have a pair of tweezers, and if it touches the side it beeps, and if it touches the side you failed. Well, it's sort of the opposite way in. Instead of taking things out, you're putting things in, but it has to be very carefully done without touching the sides, and really that takes years to master. So highly skilled hands, highly skilled technicians is what you need. Now the graft has been put inside the incision. Great job, but the job is not yet done, because first that graft has to be healed into it. It has to connect to all the blood supply that it needs in order to start growing and functioning like a proper hair follicle. Let's go from a timeline basis. Let's go within that first 24 hours, from 0 to 24 hours. The graft has been placed inside the incision, and the only thing keeping it in place at that point in time is what we call mechanical fixation. Simply the position of where it is and the surrounding pressure of surrounding tissues is what keeps it in place. There's nothing stitched in, there's nothing glued in, there's nothing else keeping that hair follicle in. So it's crucial, especially in that first 24 hours, that you don't try and play the hero. You don't try and mess around too much, because it's going to be very easy for that graft to dislodge, come flying out, and if it leaves the skin, I guarantee you're not going to be getting it back in, and if that's the case, it's not going to grow. So definitely the first 24 hours, there's nothing else keeping it in place apart from your own actions. So you do want to make sure you stay in bed, not moving around too much, and that's going to help that graft begin the healing process. Think of it as parking a car in a garage. Now the garage is a little bit bigger than the car, so all we've done is put the car inside of the garage, in this case your graft inside of that slit or that incision, but there's nothing stopping it from flying out. Now from 24 hours onwards, this is where we're going to start getting what we call fibrin adhesion. So we've carefully measured the depth of the incisions that we make when we're doing hair transplant surgery. Like I said before, it could be 1.3, 1.4 millimeters thick, and we've sort of measured the length of this blade to the length of your graft. So we extract first, we measure the length of the graft, and that allows us to know how deep to put our blade in. And what we're really going to be relying on at this point in time is a proper wound bed. A wound bed is the bottom part of that incision. It should be nice and bleedy. There should be good blood flow through that area. Especially in this case, we want good plasma. And this takes me to another point in another video where we talk about platelet-rich plasma. But forgetting that for now, we need the plasma and we need the platelets in that plasma to start fixating that graft in place. Because within the plasma, there is going to be a substance called fibrinogen, which ends up converting into something called fibrin. Now, what fibrin does, fibrin is almost like biological glue. You'll have all these little fibrin molecules or fibrin particles that essentially kind of connect this graft to the side of the wound where it is, all the way down. So it's almost like covering the whole area area in glue, sticking it in place. At this point, the graft is a little bit more secure, but this fibrin glue-like substance isn't the strongest connection in the world. And so yes, they're going to feel at this point a little bit tacky, a little bit scabby, right? But if you mess with them, you can still manually push them out, even with a little bit of force. They're not really going to fly out if you just turn your head really quickly anymore. That part's done. But if you start messing with it, touching it at this point, then they can actually dislodge, they can slide out, unfortunately. And so this is where we need what we call adequate post-op hemostasis. We want to control the amount of bleeding. We just want enough blood, enough plasma in order to create that little fibrin mesh, that biological glue that's going to stick that graft in place and keep it there. And that process really takes from 24 to 72 hours. So now we're on to the end of day 3 and now we're going on to day 4. So from day 4 onwards, but actually really from about day 3 onwards. So let's say it can be a little bit nebulous, the exact timing, and some people heal faster than other people, but around about day 3 or day 4, we're going to get what we call early cellular integration. At this point is when the graft is actually starting to become part of your body again. Before this, it's just kind of stuck in there, but it needs to start connecting, making its own connections to surrounding structures. There's a process we call plasmatic imbibition. Sounds complicated. We like to use a lot of complicated words in medicine, but let's break it down. Imbibition or imbibing means to consume. Plasmatic means from plasma, right? So the grafts start to imbibe or consume nutrients from the surrounding plasma, and that's how the graft stays alive in that first few days. Then there's a process called angiogenesis, which happens around about day 4. Angiogenesis means, again, if we break down the word, angio meaning blood vessel, genesis meaning creation or formation of. So angiogenesis means creation of or formation of blood vessels. And it's almost like a little tiny blood vessel, so small you can't even really see them with the eye, that start going from the surrounding tissue, the surrounding skin, towards that graft, connecting it via a blood supply to the rest of your body. Once this part is done, then that graft actually has a good permanent source of nutrition and nutrients from your own blood supply. That means it's going to be able to survive and it's not going to die off randomly. Simultaneously, while angiogenesis is going on, you're also going to get collagen production. Remember, collagen is something like scaffolding for the skin, right? It's a structural component. It gives stability and firmness to that area. And then at this point, once the collagen structure has started to be formed, remember, collagen is the basis of what we call connective tissue. And connective tissue does exactly what it sounds like. It's tissue that connects things together. That fibrin clot, or that fibrin mesh that I mentioned earlier on, that happens quite early on, that starts getting broken down and replaced with something called connective tissue. So now the graft has not only a good blood supply, it's also got connective tissue. So it's really starting to actually become one with its surrounding. This entire process goes from around day 3 to around day 7. So by the end of that first week, all of these grafts will essentially have been connected quite well to the surrounding area. But the collagen that gets laid down first is not exactly the strongest type of collagen. It's like sticking a plaster. It's a quick way of giving a quick connection so that more stronger connections can be formed later on. That happens after the end of week 1, where we start getting what we call true biological fixation. So remember, at the end of week 1, the graft now has a blood supply and it's got some basic connective tissue that's been formed. Well, with this blood supply now allows a certain type of cell called fibroblast to migrate to the area and lay down a special type of collagen, which is what we call type 3 collagen. That type 3 collagen is a lot stronger than the early types of collagen. What it does, it lays around the collagen around that graft. That collagen contracts and sort of locks that graft into place so that it's no longer moving around. But remember, not all of the grafts do this at the exact same time. There's going to be some that are a bit quicker, some that are a bit longer. So at this point, after week 1, yes, some of them are going to have this fibroblast and type 3 collagen laying down and locking it into place. And some of the grafts are going to be playing catch up and getting there by day 8, 9, or 10. So it takes a few days for all of the grafts to really settle into place. So by the end of day 10, at this point, light trauma will not dislodge the grafts anymore. So you can touch and you can rub it a little bit, even slightly knock your head. Those grafts are not going to come out very easily. But this collagen has still not fully set. And so heavy impacts, traumas, or rough rubbing is going to dislodge those. If you're going crazy and really rubbing that area, or if you're scratching it because it's super itchy, or if you take a knock on the head, let's say for example, you're playing football and you're trying to head at the ball, or you get into some sort of fight and someone hits you on the head, then that can still break those very fragile connections that are made at that point. It can break them and that graft can still dislodge. So you're not completely safe at this point, but you are like 90% safe at this point. Although you still need to take care of it for at least another 4 days to get to the end of 2 weeks before you can start breathing easy and resting easy. So after week 2 and then up to week 4, so that 2 to 4 week period is what we call full dermal integration. At this point, the type 3 collagen that was initially laid down, which is pretty strong anyway, gets replaced by even stronger types of collagen. Type 1 collagen now gets laid down. That fully cements and locks those grafts grafts into place so that they're not dislodged and not going to be moving around. And a little bit of scar tissue does get formed around that follicular graft as well, and that acts like a further seal and a further lock so that graft has basically no chance of flying out after that. Once all of this has happened, then it's time to get the graft to actually start working, doing its thing. So at this point, the graft, now that it's got a good blood supply and it's been locked into place, it's essentially as living tissue. It's acting like it was always meant to be there, but it sort of has to go through a little bit of a reset phase. And what I mean by that is the graft enters what we call the telogen phase, which is the resting phase of the natural hair growth cycle. And all of the hair follicles in your whole body have what we call an anagen phase and a telogen phase, aka growth phase and a resting phase. It grows when it's in the growth phase, it stops or it falls out when it's in the resting phase. All of these new grafts that have been added, they have a blood supply, they're connected, they're locked in place now with type 1 collagen and scar tissue. This is when they actually enter the telogen phase. So you actually do get quite a bit of shedding that goes on at this point. All of the hair that was in those follicles gets sort of essentially kicked out, gets evicted from its previous home. You get shedding, all of the hair falls off, and at that point, you're now ready to grow new live hair. So ultimately, this means by the end of the first month, that new graft is now biologically indistinguishable from existing hair that should have always been there. I hope this helped to answer your question about what to do after surgery, and I hope this helped explain exactly how long it takes for those new grafts to fully anchor within the skin so that they're indistinguishable from normal hair. But follow the instructions as you go along, and you should be having the best chance of having all of those grafts survive until that point. You really want over 99%. If this information helped you, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure you do like it, you subscribe to us, because we'll have more information like this, not just in hair, but in medicine as well. See you on the next one.